Diffusion, the international science radio show.
We have a bouncer on the doors of perception.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
It gets pretty exciting.
The myths, the truths.
Toxicology.
Astroseismology.
Magnetism. The dark side.
Genetically engineered potatoes.
Planetoid.
I love that word.
Hello and welcome to Diffusion. Sit back and relax while we radiate weird and wonderful science into your brain. I'm Ian Wolfe. This week, the Fresh Scientists talk about the science of trauma, pain and fish in the time it takes for a sparkler to burn down. But first up, here's news of a radioactive waste dump on the cheap. Dump deception. While the nation was looking the other way, the government quietly announced that after 40 years and many court cases, they've decided on the wheat-growing hub of Kimba in South Australia for the National Nuclear Waste Dump. Jeff Baldock will be paid 4 times the market value for his property. His farm was chosen last year after a community vote that deliberately excluded all Aboriginal people and farmers from adjoining properties. The Indigenous people of the area took the Australian government to court for racial discrimination. However, the federal court decided that choosing who can vote on the basis of their race was not racial discrimination. There's not a lot of jobs for the unemployment-stricken town. Just 25 ongoing jobs have been promised, with a $30 million bribe to the local council. People who wish to attend committee meetings where decisions about the dump are being made are required to sign gag orders, so they can't talk to the press or tell anyone what's said at the meetings. When Kimba was chosen a year ago, 49% of the population were for the dump and 51% were against it. The federal government promised they wouldn't go ahead with the project unless over 60% of the community were in favour of the dump. The community have been strongly divided. After a year of fighting, so many people are leaving Kimba that the government is now claiming that over 60% surveyed are now supporting the radioactive dump, without a single mind being changed. Jeff Baldock, the guy who owns the land, is on the Kimba Waste Dump Committee. The problem is that what's been announced is an above-ground dump for low-level radioactive waste, which is inexpensive to build and maintain. But the world's best practice and our international legal obligation is underground storage. Over 80% of the existing waste is intermediate level waste, which requires construction of a much more expensive deep underground and long-term containment. It's like the National Broadband Network project. You can do it once and do it right and suffer very few problems, or you can save money by doing it badly and have the costs and problems become an endless money pit. Low-level wastes are those with minor levels of contamination by radioactive substances, such as laboratory waste and other materials that might have come in contact with radioactive sources. Low-level radioactive waste requires robust isolation and containment for periods of up to a few hundred years, and it's suitable for disposal in an engineered near-surface facility, a shallow grave, not above ground. It's important that there are no water tables or above-ground sources of water nearby to wash the waste away and be contaminated in the centuries ahead. I would be surprised if Kimba's wheat farmers are not using a local water table. Intermediate level wastes give out higher levels of radiation. Short-lived intermediate level wastes are radioactive due to radioisotopes that decay in hundreds of years. After a few centuries, their radiation levels drop to a point where they're no longer dangerous. Long-lived intermediate-level wastes are radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. These wastes require shielding during handling and transport. They include byproducts from the treatment of spent nuclear fuel, some wastes produced by the operation of nuclear reactors, and some long-lived radiation sources used in industry. It's dangerous for these wastes to be stored as planned above the ground at the National Radioactive Waste Repository. Australian law and the international treaties we've signed require that intermediate level waste be stored hundreds of metres underground and away from water tables, a geological repository. The Australian government has no plans for such a deep underground dump designed to last 100,000 years. Spent fuel rods from the HIFAR high-flux Australian reactor have been returned from France after being reprocessed, converting them to long-lived intermediate-level wastes. There are also barrels of soil collected from the 1950s British nuclear weapons testing sites, such as Maralinga, waste from nuclear medicine, and waste from the Opal research reactor ongoing that replaced the old HIFAR reactor. Funny story, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency ARPANSA refused to grant a licence for the government to run the Opal research reactor in 2005 at the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation at Lucas Heights in Sydney. ARPANSA had been caught out by the Australian National Audit Office, who found issues in conflicting regulation, poor cost recovery, inadequate licensing, and inconsistent monitoring. In response, the ARPANSA CEO made a public statement saying that a satisfactory waste management strategy must be in place before he will issue a licence to operate the new reactor. However, only a year later, in 2006, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency suddenly granted the licence for Opal to start operating, despite the ongoing total lack of any plan for safe permanent storage. I tweeted the agency for assistance. ARPANSA kindly tweeted me back with a link to the 2006 approval decision. The ARPANSA CEO starts out by saying that an underground nuclear waste storage facility is essential to the licence. Much later, in the 170-page document, he notes that the government tried hard to force a nuclear dump in South Australia, but were defeated in the court. He therefore believed the government was serious in their intention to build a deep underground facility for an intermediate level waste in a short amount of time, so he approved the licence for the new Opal research reactor despite the absence of any safe dump. In the document, he insists that substantial and evident progress will have to be made to build the underground dump for the licence to be renewed. Somehow, the government kept convincing him without any progress for 14 years. So the government has announced that they will sneak intermediate level waste into the low level waste dump that's above ground temporarily. Temporarily becomes just a legal fiction when you have no plans to ever move the waste into a permanent safe storage. High-level wastes are byproducts from the reprocessing of spent nuclear power reactor fuels and emit high levels of radiation and significant quantities of heat. The only disposal option currently available for such waste is very deep, permanent geological disposal. The only nation that has built such a deep geological deposit is Finland. Finland has all of its nuclear power stations on one island and is dug deep under the island. While there are technically no water tables leading to the mainland, the island is surrounded by sea. Australia does not generate high-level wastes, because we don't have nuclear power stations. But several prime ministers from both Liberal National and Labor governments have advocated over the years that we should accept high-level waste from other countries. And the United States have been lobbying Australia to do this very strongly for over 40 years. The argument runs that we sell them the uranium, so they should get the power, while leaving the dangerous waste as our problem. It's called nuclear leasing. Of course, Doing so would mean the waste is shipped around the world with all the dangers of spills, sinking and piracy. As it is, a lot of the waste will have to be shipped from Sydney to Kimber, a distance of over 1,700 kilometres by road. What could go wrong? I'm sure it's a coincidence that the legislation that covers how to treat nuclear waste in Australia, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Regulations 2018, was amended in November 2019, just 2 months before the announcement of a radioactive waste dump that doesn't meet national or international standards. The South Australian state legislation banning the building of the dump is still in place, and the Indigenous people are protesting against the dump. You're listening to Ian Wolfe on Diffusion Science Radio. Send emails to science@diffusionradio.com. We're brought to you across Australia on the Community Radio Network and podcast over the internet on www.diffusionradio.com. And now, the Fresh Science Bright Sparks Challenge continues. Sarah Brooker has been training early career scientists in how to speak to the media and to give them experience in being interviewed and presenting to the public. After a day of training, they retire to the pub to test their skills at the Bright Spark Challenge. The Bright Spark Challenge is for these scientists to explain their research in the time it takes a party sparkler to burn down. You'll hear about reducing trauma for refugees, the neuroscience of measuring pain, and fish getting cold.
From the University of New South Wales, Joel. Hi, Joel Hoffman, come on down.
All right, so refugees experience multiple types of traumas, but what if I told you that experiencing something like having a visa application inexplicably delayed is just as traumatic as having your house bombed? So my research is showing that these events have the similar impact upon refugee mental health, which is changing the way that we understand trauma, and that trauma does not have to be life-threatening for it to be traumatic. This is going to have an impact on how we treat trauma in refugees, but also how we look at settlement supports, and if there are ways that we are settling refugees that are contributing to their mental health. And I got another second to spare.
So how are we doing in Australia?
In terms of settling refugees, not well. Actually, we have a really good policy if people come here through the UNHCR, and we're one of the best in the world. People come through other methods, I would say we're probably one of the worst.
So when you said the way that we currently treat refugees in terms of mental health is not quite working, how do we currently treat, and how would you like to see us treat? What changes would you like to see?
So the best evidence-based treatments for trauma and PTSD in refugees primarily targets fear. So something from a horrific event, and we have really good ways of doing that. But from other events, which kind of are not necessarily about fear, but challenge kind of these deep moral understandings of ourselves in the world, that produces things like anger, shame, guilt, loss. And our treatments don't really seem to work for that. In some cases, make things worse. So by understanding what's happening in those types of reactions, which our research is doing, we're now able to develop treatments which can target those types of reactions and hopefully improve things for them.
Do we already have treatments that work for those sort of reactions, like for soldiers perhaps?
Actually, this is an emerging research even in veterans at the moment. So it's called moral injury is the term that's often used. There are treatments, but they haven't been validated, and they've been created before we really know what's actually happening. So we're trying to really understand things at a mechanistic level so that when we do create treatments, they're actually founded on science and not what we think.
Phew, you've got a lot of work ahead of you. What is your next step then?
So we're still doing some experimental work to make sure that we have found the right mechanisms. Next is we want to do a study to show how we can reduce these types of reactions. If we can do that, create a treatment that can be used in not only Australia, but this is really cutting edge research around the world. So this is a big issue not only here, but in the US, in Europe. If we can find something that works, it could have global implications.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Joel. Lindsay Parker from Macquarie University. She's got her number one fan here tonight, so we'll grab you while he's happy. Here you go.
Hi, I'm a neuroscientist from Macquarie University, and can you guys believe that it's almost 2020, but the best way we have to tell how much pain we're in is a scale from 1 to 10? That means that we're not getting accurate pain treatments, and people like babies and animals, we have no way to tell how much pain they're in. So my research, what we discovered is a new way to detect highly sensitive molecules that are rare events, such as pain molecules, what happen when we are in pain. And what we're doing is trying to work on commercializing a way of looking at these molecules to quantify pain for the first time and be able to say, you're in this much pain, this is how much medicine you get. That's very early.
Just for the scientists, just a PR tip. If you've got time left over, that's when you thank your sponsors. And Macquarie University, there you go. Thank you. So you're looking at a way of kind of measuring pain or quantifying it. How do you see that actually rolling out in laboratories or GP offices or at home?
Sure. So what we've done now is taken this into humans, where we collected human blood samples from people that we know have chronic pain, and we're searching for that molecule with really sensitive technologies to find out if we can correlate that exactly with the amount of pain that the person reported on a scale of 1 to 10. So these are things that we can already detect in the lab. It only takes 30 minutes or less to run a test like this on these samples. So my student's actually here. She's the one that runs them. And so what we're working is to see whether we can correlate that. And then if that's the same type of test that you get already when you go get a blood test in the hospital right now. So it would take the same amount of time as what a blood test takes now. But ideally, we'd like to take that to something being like, like a blood glucose monitor, where you can see that in your house or see that in a doctor's office within minutes.
Are you talking about chronic pain? You've got consistent pain, therefore that's something you can measure versus, something that's happening spontaneously, because that, I imagine, would be hard to measure.
Yeah, so, the reason why we're using chronic pain as an example is because we know that those people have a sustained amount of pain, and also they're taking high levels of opioids, and opioids actually stimulates the pain pathway, making it easier to see an upregulation in the molecules related to pain. So we're just using that as a model of ways to look for the molecules related and correlated to pain right now. But also, there's a huge economic burden, so $73.4 billion per year in Australia is spent on people managing chronic pain. So it's also of interest, especially to that population and things like aged care, to come up with a solution for this.
That is a huge industry, and it's good to throw in the figures so that you actually know the area of research that you're in. How far off are you? How many molecules are you looking at, and is it sort of in the near future?
Yeah, so what we discovered recently is that we saw a molecule that's completely missing from patients that have pain. Not patients, sorry, animals that had pain. So what we're doing now is looking for that molecule to see where does it go. Did it go into the bloodstream? Did it go into the cerebral spinal fluid in their spinal cord? And what we're looking at is where is that, and why did it disappear, and why is it so correlated with pain? If we can detect that in their blood or in their spinal fluids, we can easily detect that in the lab within months. But we're first, in the next year, correlating that with the levels of pain, like I said.
Any neuroscientists in the room want a quiz? Oh, I knew there'd be someone with a neuroscience background. Any questions from the audience? Yes, Richard.
The scale from 1 to 10 must be completely subjective because people have different sensitivities. So how can you use that for calibration?
The whole point is to put a number on it that's not subjective. So, of course, we're just using what people say, but that's part of the reason for using chronic pain people, because we know they have documented chronic pain, and it's not just a one-time event where they're saying, I'm a 4 out of 10 today. So 4 is actually the point where above 4 you get, below 4 they tell you to take paracetamol, above 4 4 to 6, I guess, they tell you to take things like ibuprofen, and above that, they start giving you morphine, just so you guys know. But anyways, I wouldn't recommend opioids because they activate the pain pathway, so that's not the right answer. But the whole reason is to put a number on it, and right now we're just using people that we know have documented pain over time.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Well done. Laura. You have a support crowd. Laura Michie is from the University of Technology, Sydney.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm a fish biologist and I've recently worked out that the water that we're releasing from dams can negatively impact fish and it's severely reducing their growth rates. So dams release cold water from the bottom of the dams, and this is often 16 degrees colder than what we'd expect in our rivers, and the effects of this cold water pollution can extend for about 300 kilometres from the dam. So this is very devastating for our warm water adapted fish that we have in Australia, and the research highlights the need for effective mitigation of this cold water pollution if we're going to protect our very sensitive fish. Thank you, everyone.
So the fish don't like the cold, a bit like me. I mean, we've got dams everywhere, and surely we've been releasing water for a long time. Is this the first time that we've discovered that some fish don't like cold water?
Not precisely. We've known for a long time that the water is a lot colder, and we know that it can kill fish, but this is kind of the first time we've quantified like sublethal effects. And this is really important because sublethal effects do really have important implications for health and fitness. And it's still something we need to consider in dam management and water management schemes that we have.
Is that what caused that big fish kill recently? You know, the photos we saw everywhere of dead fish.
No, it's not related. They're often very different sort of locations. But however, the research is really important because millions and tens of millions of dollars has been put into helping fish after these fish kills. And it's really important, and a lot of that's through stocking programs. It's really important that understanding the temperatures in the river might affect larval fish that we're putting back into our rivers. So those stocking programs really need to use this research to put them into important places in the river that's not going to kill them once we have spent these millions of dollars on these fish.
So you said we already knew that cold water can kill fish. You've just found that cold water can also slow down their growth. If we already knew that cold water kills fish and we've done nothing about it, what makes you think people are going to do something about it knowing that it just slows their growth?
I think just adding to the research really is really important. Like at the moment there's no efficient sort of economical ways to fix this problem, so that if there's more research, more people are going to invest their time and energy in developing ways that they can basically change dams to release this warmer water rather than the cold water. And there's a lot of backing by recreational fishers because they of course care about the size of their fish, and people that live on these rivers, which is a large proportion of people in New South Wales and Australia, really care about the health of these fish populations.
I can fix it. Just don't open the bottom, open the top of the dam. Isn't it that easy?
Unfortunately not. The dams need to be more than 100% full to release water over the top of the dam, and I think a lot of us know that's not the case at the moment.
So what can we do? Has anyone else in the world found a solution for this?
In Australia, we're trialling a new method, which is a thermal curtain, which basically funnels water from the surface of the dam to be released downstream. We have had a lot of problems with this new device, but I think it's a bit of time and energy that needs to be put into it to make it the most effective sort of thing. But it's definitely a lot cheaper than older methods that we have used. Like older methods might involve $25 million to install multi-level outlets onto dams that you can choose different areas, but things like this new curtain only cost about $4 or $5 million. So hopefully things like that can be improved in their effectiveness, and then we can start implementing them in other places around Australia.
Thank you. Any questions about fish? Fish that don't like cold water? No tricky questions, or I'm going to throw you a challenge later in the night. Thank you very much.
More Fresh Science Sparkler sessions with Sarah Brooker from Science in Public next week. You can see photos of all of this week's scientists on the website. And that's all from us this week on Diffusion. Are you a scientist, artist, biohacker or maker who'd like to be interviewed about your work? Would your company like to sponsor Diffusion? Send your contributions, opinions, helpful suggestions and donations to science@diffusionradio.com. That's science@diffusionradio.com. Please like the Diffusion Science Radio page on Facebook and rate the show on iTunes. Tell your friends. Follow me on Twitter @IanWolf. The news music was Rhinos Theme by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. I produce Diffusion, which is broadcast around Australia to 28 stations on the Community Radio Network, including 2RBM in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, 8CCC in Alice Springs and Tennant Creek, 2MVR in Nambucca Valley, 3MBR in the Mallee Border districts of Victoria and South Australia, City Park Radio 7LTN in Launceston, Tasmania, and 2XXFM in Canberra. Diffusion is syndicated globally on the National Science Foundation's Science 360 internet radio station and also on astronomy.fm. Subscribe to the podcast on the Diffusion website, www.diffusionradio.com. That's www.diffusionradio.com, and check the website for links, photos and videos about this week's show. If you enjoyed the show, you can explore more than 1,000 previous episodes archived on diffusionradio.com, where the shows are labelled by keywords so you can focus in on the stories you want to hear. Join my patrons at patreon.com/diffusionradio. Make a donation through paypal.me/IanWolf, or buy through my affiliate link www.diffusionradio.com/support. Subscribe to the Diffusion YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/diffusionradio. I'm Ian Wolf. Join us inside your audio device of choice for more science wondering next week on Diffusion Science Radio.
Science is fun. It helps you to learn, to know, and to appreciate. When you study science, you may go on field trips. You discover the marvelous interrelationships between all living things. You learn to read the history of the Earth as it is written in rocks and fossils. You find out what makes things tick, everything from a molecule to a living organism. In the study of science is found the most useful and satisfying knowledge of man. Knowledge of his physical world, its past, its present, and its future. And in your moments of relaxation, now and in the years to come, you will find the study of science leading you into fascinating pursuits. Photography, collecting. Why study science? Study science because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.